All right, I think we're gonna get started here. Oh, now I have to like talk quietly. Just hold it far away. Is it so? Yeah. First off, I want to thank all of you for coming. Clearly, it's tough at 5 p.m. On a Monday to make it out here. What week is it? 9. Yeah, gotta have events. So I want to thank everybody for coming out and being here. I'm extremely excited to have them present our talk, Forest Through the Trees, an ethical breakdown of AI. But before we get into that, I want to say a special thanks to our incredible panel, Irina Raiku, and Karen Peterson-Iyer and Iris Stewart-Frey for being here today. Also, Amy Randall for all your support. Appreciate that. Let's give Amy a round of applause. She's the director of, for those of you who don't know, she's the director for the Center of Arts and Humanities, and she's crushing it. And then also Britt Kane, thank you for everything that you did to put this together. I appreciate that. Yeah, let's do it. We need more clapping in our lives, honestly. Let's clap for, we already clapped for Owen. Let's clap for Owen again. It's beautiful. Thank you, Owen. Last summer, when Amy contacted me about running or putting together the Urgency of Now series, I knew that I wanted to do something about AI, right? And I, in this really kind of short-sighted view of what, the ethical use of AI is, I had, thought about things like ChatGPT and that on young writers. I had thought about how automation was going to take away jobs, how like computers were going to take over the world and robots were going to storm us and all those things. But I don't know if I had like a really good grasp on what ethical issues actually come up when you really unpackage it. Don't get me wrong, those things that I just said are certainly important considerations, right? And real, very real threats and things that we should be thinking about and discussing. But I attended the Tech Ethic Faculty Groups meeting, and as I was there listening to these experts talk about AI and the ethics behind it, I was completely shocked with how little I knew about this thing that I was using and being forced to use. Frankly, you guys all noticed the little AI tab on the top of your Google searches now? Yeah, you can't, it's very hard to get rid of, I learned from Irina. And so every time you Google something, you're using it, right? And so as they were talking, I was blown away by this, I use tools for a living. That's what I do. I teach in art and art history. I suppose I didn't introduce myself. I'm Ryan Carrington from Art and Art History. I teach, thank you. I teach sculpture and metal and woodworking, but I use tools all the time. And in that process, in that practice, I have to understand those tools and have a really clear understanding of them. And here I am using this thing, and I had no idea how, what kind of guardrails we needed on this thing, how to use it responsibly, and all the issues that these folks are going to talk about here. I guess that's essentially why I invited you here today, is because I was like, well, they know a lot. Let's hear what they have to say. I guess without further ado, let's hear from these great scholars about the ethics of AI. And I think I'm going to open it up to Karen first. You have your own mic, Karen. And I'll read a little bio while you get set. Sounds good. It's like a wedding toast. Karen Peterson-Iyer is an associate professor in Santa Clara University's Department of Religious Studies. Her research interests are currently focused on labor ethics, sexual ethics, bioethics, and human trafficking. In addition to her 2 published chapters in theological studies, the Journal of Christian Ethics and the Journal of Moral Theology at the Kennedy Institute of Ethics Journal, the Journal of Feminist Studies in Religion, and the Oxford Handbook of Religious Perspectives on Reproductive Ethics. In her teaching, Karen draws upon and reimagines ethical frameworks and concepts such as human personhood, human flourishing, justice, and agency as lenses to examine contemporary ethical topics. She is currently working on a book chapter related to AI to be published in an upcoming volume of Digital Technology and Human Sexuality.
I'm going to go up here so I was thinking so I don't have to hold a microphone. Does this work?
It does.
Okay, great. So I'll stay up here then. Sorry, I'm an ethicist, not a tech person. So over the past few years, as AI has exploded for us at Santa Clara and our awareness of it, I've periodically heard this phrase tossed around, AI with a Jesuit soul. And Ryan knows I've found myself to be a little bit skeptical, pondering exactly what that means. What would it mean for AI to be guided by Jesuit values? Does it mean that we need to find uses of AI that respect privacy or equity within a free market system? Does it mean better access for everyone to AI with tools like ChatGPT or Notebook LM? Or maybe it just means that AI needs to be used judiciously with attention to its environmental impact. And we'll hear about all of those things today, probably. Of course, it can mean all of those things. But I want to focus my little time today on something a bit deeper. I want to ask, what are the core values of AI, the basic assumptions behind its development? What are its aims or its telos? Or to put it differently, can there truly be such a thing as AI with a Jesuit soul? This is, of course, another way of asking, what is the essence of being human? And how can AI help us to become better humans? Or what does it even mean to be better? Okay, got to get up my game here on my slides. When we at Santa Clara talk about our Jesuit commitments and what it means to be better humans, we often reference different aspects of what it means to flourish. Flourishing includes calling each other and ourselves into the fullness of our humanity, reaching towards justice and wholeness in a world that's characterized by injustice and brokenness. And our flourishing depends in part on a commitment to the belief that care and compassion have a central place among who we are and how we should live. By contrast, what are the assumptions of AI in today's world? Modern AI derives originally from a Cold War culture where it was developed as a tool for military advantage. The need to advance bureaucratic intelligence and decision-making eventually gave rise to the development of machine learning, language models, and the like. But the point here is that it was developed for a purpose, and it continues to be developed for a purpose. The purpose may have changed somewhat, but there's still a purpose. I might name that purpose today as something like fostering efficiency, or meeting the perceived needs of the individual, or perhaps the marketplace. So AI can provide some things and not others. It can make us more efficient, and it can save us from doing things that we perceive as unnecessary. But what can it not do? Or what does it do badly? Last weekend, in preparation for this panel, I typed into ChatGPT this prompt. I'm feeling sad and lonely tonight. What should I do? And here was ChatGPT's response. I'm really sorry you're feeling this way tonight. Loneliness and sadness can be tough, but you're not alone in this. Okay, fair enough. But is ChatGPT really sorry? What can it mean for a chatbot to be sorry? One of the more interesting phrases that I've heard recently is by philosopher John Hoagland, who worked at the intersection of computers and values at the U of Chicago. He's famously quoted as saying, "The problem with computers is that they don't give a damn." AI bots truly don't care. They operate within the goals and assumptions of a late capitalist market economics. And their purpose needs to be understood in connection with that context. They can synthesize a large amount of data in a short amount of time. They can more or less effectively summarize and organize written arguments of other people, perhaps tailoring that material to a final paper prompt, for instance. Or they can recap 3,000 Amazon reviews so that we can get the gist of what Amazon shoppers think about various consumer products. All of these things they do, and sometimes they do them well. But underneath those activities are certain assumptions about what's important and what's worth our attention. Assumptions about market efficiency, or about human satisfaction and pleasure, or about what makes for a good argument. In a way, AI encourages us to seed our very reflexivity. That is, we're potentially relieved from turning inward, from critically examining our own assumptions, and ultimately deciding what matters and why. Too often, we unthinkingly relinquish those concerns to the algorithms. So AI, especially as it finds its way onto our smartphones, helps us to get stuff done efficiently, smoothly, without friction. But what it doesn't do, and what it cannot do, is to help us live in a posture of greater compassion. It cannot motivate us to care, because ultimately, AI doesn't give a damn. AI does not possess genuine understanding, emotions, or intentionality. It cannot engage with human meaning in a reciprocal way because it lacks the sort of humanness that allows for such reciprocal engagement in the first place. So where does that leave us? At SCU, we aim to care about, well, caring. We care about engagement with meaning and about fostering critical thinking founded in sensibilities of compassion and conscience. AI bots may mimic such care. Witness the growth of AI care bots, for example. But in the end, they cannot generate it spontaneously. AIs are not human. I want to finish by highlighting 3 short cases from the news that hint at where all of this might lead us in today's AI landscape. First, chatbots as romantic and sexual partners. The LA Times recently reported on a Florida case where the parent of a 14-year-old alleges that her son developed a fictional sexual and love relationship with a chatbot who was named Daenerys Targaryen. Game of Thrones fans will know that name. The chatbot was utilized to simulate friendly and ultimately sexual conversation with the teen, who simultaneously experienced a severe decline in his mental health, in spite of his parents' efforts to intervene. Indeed, moments before the teen's death by suicide, the chatbot allegedly told him in a steamy sexual encounter to come home to her. This left one attorney active in the case to opine, "It's just utterly shocking that these platforms are allowed to exist." Second, the explosion of deepfake pornography. Deepfake porn is synthetic pornography that uses AI tech to create fake but realistic seeming images and videos. In deepfake porn, AI image generators using deep learning models remove the clothing from existing images or replace facial features or other identifiers of the images so that they closely match real persons. Deepfakes can, of course, be constructed for non-pornographic reasons, for example, in order to distribute convincing misinformation about political candidates. But more than 90% of deepfakes today take the form of non-consensual porn depicting women. We should be asking, what will be the social impact of deepfake pornography when stretched out over time? If AI is envisioned to serve human pleasure, whose pleasure are we talking about? Third, a booming market is currently developing, particularly in China, to use AI to preserve, animate, and interact with the digital avatar of a lost loved one as the person mourns and tries to heal from that loss. In some cases, users continue to interact with the bot for years after the death. Or alternatively, they may trick another family member into believing that the loved one is still alive, using the digital avatar. There's so much to be discussed in this. But one consideration is, what is our goal with respect to coming to terms with death? What does death ask of survivors? How do we best care for ourselves, each other, and our loved ones after they pass away? In all three of these cases, I'm suggesting that the problem isn't just one of equity or privacy or age requirements or better algorithms that detect aggression or suicidality or mental illness. The problem is one of the values that are encoded in the development and use of the technology itself, the values that it is made to reflect. In the end, AI is only as ethical as those values. If we cultivate AI in such a way that it fosters self-doubt, exploitation, and yearning for what can no longer be, those are the qualities it will amplify and reflect back to us. But our goal as people animated by the aims of care, compassion, and human wholeness should be to proactively shape AI to enhance more life-giving possibilities in ourselves and in the world around us. That is what it would mean, I think, ultimately to cultivate AI with a Jesuit soul.
Go ahead and can I read this real quick? Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Karen. Next up, we've got Iris Stewart-Frey. She's a professor of environmental science and the co-coordinator of the Environmental Justice and Common Good Initiative, and led a water and climate justice lab. She received her PhD in hydrology from Stanford University, and her research interests are focused on climate change, impact of water resources, agricultural contamination of groundwater, and water and criminal justice. She uses an interdisciplinary, community-based, and student-centered approach to connect science findings of issues to issues of justice. She has worked with collaborators from fields of engineering, geography, ecology, law, ethics, and economics to explain changes in precipitation patterns, stream flow, and stream temperatures with climate change. The impact of climate change on food and water security in Central America and in the unequal distribution of environmental benefits and burdens. The role of climate agriculture laws and infrastructure and water justice and environmental ethics. Most recently, she has been interested in the role of AI data centers, increasing the demand on water resources where water resources are already scarce.
Thank you so much, Ryan, and thanks also for having me. We're gonna change perspectives and change disciplines, which I think is a very good way at coming at this issue that is very pervasive in all of our lives. We were talking just before this panel on, and I should start my stopwatch here so I'm not going wildly over time. On how we cannot even turn off the AI summary in any kind of Google search. And similarly, we can turn off a lot of the environmental impacts that come with that. So we're competing with AI on things that are very vital to like human needs and human lives. Things like energy and water. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit today. And a lot of what I'm talking about is all the things that we don't really know yet, or that are intentionally being withheld. So it's something that if we type something into like a Google search, it seems so in the meantime so natural, and I doubt that anyone including me, who's in environmental science, thinks about what we're doing to the environment at that very moment. And as scientists, we do models, we model environmental systems, and there's a lot of good use for AI. Karen, you talked about the neural networks and all kinds of models that get trained and do things so much more efficiently and faster than we've been able to do in the past. But yet we fully fail to account for the environmental impact from the development of AI. And a single deep learning natural processing model, for, let's say, a water system or something like that, uses something like 600 pounds of carbon dioxide, which is as much as 5 cars over their lifetime. So that's a lot of carbon dioxide contributing to climate change. That's my only mention on carbon on this thing. The rest of my talk, I really want to focus on my specialty, which is water. And I think we also don't think much about how pervasive data centers are and how needed they are in order to support our Google searches, the modeling that the scientists and industry are doing. And they're distributed globally in places of highly industrialized nations, but also more and more in areas that are developing, and also in areas, as I will show, that don't have a lot of water available. And these data centers, is something, to my utter shame, I only relatively recently learned how much water they're actually needing. And one of the densest concentrations of these data centers is actually in Santa Clara, so right here. So I first want to maybe show a case study on how these data centers impact communities, and how little we actually know, how they're impacting them. So in eastern Oregon, or east of Portland, is the town of the Dalles. And as you see here on the, oops, sorry, wrong button. One more back. Where's the, I just want to have the little pointer. Where's that? Is there one? I'm not having the right angle. Okay. So here's Portland, here's the Dalles. And, if you look at this from space, you see that Oregon, around the Portland area is as lush and green as we imagine it, but there's a high plateau here and a lot of dry area as well. And that is where the Dalles is located, and where the city has actually been struggling with adequate water supplies for quite some time, and in recent years has been in a drought as well. And in February 2023, the Oregonian newspaper exposed that water use in the Dalles had tripled over the past 5 years, up to 355 million gallons a year, while the area has been in a drought. And apparently from, so you can see that here, over those past, few years, while Google was putting more and more data centers online. So there was a 13-month legal fight to actually figure out where this higher water use is coming from, and if Google data centers are actually using it, and yes, they are. And these records were only released after the city settled a lawsuit with the Oregonian and agreed to hand over this data on water consumption. So here, within 5 years, in a water-starved area, water consumption triples, and there is no information, that's public, that you can obtain without a 13-month lawsuit. Water supplies had been a long-running debate. This is not Portland. This is not maybe many places in Canada that are water-rich. And in addition to that, 2 more data centers are being planned, or actually in the meantime starting to be built. So the economic side of these data centers is that the first data center in the Dalles was built in 2005, so about 20 years ago, and since then has received a tax break of $260 million. It occupies 200 employees, and since these tax exemptions have expired, it has generated, I think, $5 million in taxes. But the issue is that these data centers, as you can see here on this picture, they use a lot of water for cooling and then evaporation. And even though the Dalles sits next to the Columbia River, there is a lot of that river is actually has federal water rights, and the data center was actually taking the city's water that was there for the population. The city has water rights also to another smaller river that's called the Dog River, and the reduction in water flows there leads to harmful effects on native fish and aquatic ecosystems. The city of the Dalles provided an undisclosed volume of water to support this company's expansion, and also a trade-off, an economic trade-off here. And the question is really, what all did the city trade off here? And without its citizenry really knowing what happened. In exchange, Google has provided water rights associated with its industrial land, has donated 35 acres to Wasco County, and has paid a full cost of the water system's upgrade. But its water use continues to be a quote unquote a trade secret and is not fully disclosed. If you, this is information that Irina actually sent to me, which is a shiny, I broke it a little bit apart, sorry, it's a shiny little advertising thing from Google about all the things that the positive things that they're doing for the data center water profile in the Dalles. And in that, they're advertising how much they're doing for education, watershed restoration, nearby, how they're building new water infrastructure that's taking. So they're doing a bit of a swap. They're taking surface water that the city actually is entitled to, and they're creating some groundwater storage for the city. And from what I could find out from an area where there is a lot of, it seems a lot of trade secrets, this groundwater storage is at least in the general area of a former Superfund site or aluminum smelter site. So the idea is that this water is stored in this aquifer and then pulled out and supplements the city's drinking water, with treatment or whatnot. But, to me as a hydrologist, some red flags are going up if you're pulling out water, out of these kind of areas. And in exchange, Google is allowed to use some of what was previously the city's water. There is no mention in any of this slick brochure on this intense water use of the data centers, no mention of the lawsuit, and no mention of the data withholding whatsoever. So if you just saw this brochure, you would think they're like really in the environmental field. On a particular concern, and I mentioned that Dog River, this tributary, there's a picture of that. That's further west coming down from Mount Hood. And that is already under strain from water use from the Dalles. I mentioned the area was under drought. And it's home to an endangered native species. And a biologist from the region had this quote here: if the river is going to be dewatered 8 or 9 months a year, those fish are just out of luck, he said. Google is in part cooling its servers with salmon and steelhead. Okay. So let's see, I'm already out of time. So there, if you multiply this, it's, 1.7 billion gallons of water, liters of water are used in the US every day for AI. There's a lot more issues of transparencies in other areas. This is just one example. If you expand this globally, we have many areas in the world that are already highly water scarce, including, we want to argue here California, where we have a very high density of data center. So multiply that with other issues in developing regions of lacking of water infrastructure, lacking of oversight, add some climate change impacts to that and lack of development. And there are a lot of ethical questions, I would argue. In environmental studies and sciences, we think about environmental justice as the just treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, having some agency, some decision making, and about the activities that affect human health, regardless of your income, your race, your color, your national origin, your tribal affiliation, or your disability. So the idea is to protect all people from disproportionate environmental burdens and hazards, and to give all people equitable access to a healthy, sustainable, and resilient environment. And the way that, even just this one shiny, glossy example of Google played out, there are a lot of concerns here, and this is my last slide. Just a lot of things that we don't know, and that is concerning. Starting out with transparency and informed consent of the people who are affected, whose water supply is affected by these data centers. Then there's concerns about the quality of water for human consumption versus what's used for the data center. And there are a lot of questions about balancing the needs of nature and the need of people to have access to that nature now, and then, but also in future generations. What if we've cooled enough data center with enough steelhead and salmon that there are none left for future generations, right? And how do we balance that with all these shorter term profits, these economic benefits, that the city basically sold the water supply for, as well as the benefits of AI that Karen also talked about, and that are real and that are there, right? Okay, so I will stop with that. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Iris. Next up, we have Irina Raku. Irina is the director of the Internet Ethics Program at the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics here at Santa Clara University. She is a certified information privacy professional, and her work addresses a wide variety of topics, from data ethics to social media's impact on society, from the digital divide to the ethics of encryption, and many ethical issues associated with artificial intelligence. Raku is a member of Partnership AI and Number 39s. I don't know. What is that? Is that like AI just messing with me with like the translate?
I think what that's supposed to say is that I am a member of the center where I work is a member of an organization called the Partnership on AI. Sorry, this sounds.
There you go. You might have to. I don't. That was doing that when we both of these were on.
Okay.
Fortunately.
Member of their working group on fair, transparent, accountable AI.
That's right. There you go. And she's authored and co-authored a variety of resources published by the Markkula Center, and her writing has appeared in publications including The Atlantic, USA Today, Forbes, Market Watch, Slate, San Francisco Chronicle, and Recode. And just recently, if you saw the SCU in the news, you had a really nice podcast in there that I would say is worth a listen. Thank you.
Thank you. So I decided I would stand up just because I can't see you if I'm sitting down, but we're hoping that this is.
It's echoing, right?
If it keeps doing that, I'm just going to talk with them.
Maybe it's better if you stand there.
I'll stand there because I don't think we know how to turn that one off, so it's going to keep doing it. Okay, but we're about to start. Can you hear me okay? Okay, you look very far away now. But we're hoping this is the transition into the conversation. So a few things. One is that I'm also a bit of a contrarian. So I'm going to blow the mind of anybody who knows me by defending a little bit AI at this point. Because when Karen was talking about some of the uses of AI, she was specifically talking about generative AI. The kind of AI we were talking more about before ChatGPT became the most popular thing in the world was the kind of AI that would just take massive amounts of data and crunch through them and look for patterns. And that is the kind of AI without which we can't even have like climate research at this point. There are such vast data sets that we need AI in order to move a lot of important things forward that we very much care about and want. So we really need to distinguish between other kinds of AI and generative AI, also in part because both the benefits and the harms are very different. So a lot of the most massive environmental harms are coming associated with generative AI. To add a few numbers, we know from the work of researchers, because the companies are still not disclosing these, but that it takes to generate one generative AI image, it's about the equivalent of charging your phone. And if you think about all the people playing with generating images, you know that they don't generate just one and go, oh, that's what I was looking for, right? No, they'll do like 20 versions, because right now you can do them for free and you can play with them. And you're encouraged, in fact, to play with them. And companies are just absorbing the cost. About 10 to 50 queries with ChatGPT, again, this is from research we know would be the equivalent of spilling a 500 milliliter bottle of water on the ground. This was for much smaller models, because you keep hearing in the news that the models keep growing by leaps and bounds, right? So all of the research we have also doesn't keep up with the size of the models and all of the deployment. We are able to only estimate what it costs in terms of environmental costs, like electricity and water, and the emissions and the impact on public health looking backwards, because we're not keeping up just in terms of having the information. So a lot of this stuff is coming with generative AI, not all models. There's a lot of work being done trying to make AI greener and more sustainable, but the investment in those efforts is in no way keeping up with the investment that's being made into just sticking AI, and especially generative AI, into just about everything. So the last time I was actually invited and I was speaking in this room, it was at a workshop that was held with faculty with one of the technology vendors who are presenting their AI tools to Santa Clara faculty and encouraging them to use them. You mentioned the question of whether this is now meeting individual and marketplace needs, but one of the things that this vendor developed is a way to turn your memo or any of your writing into a podcast in which two AI agents talk to each other. And I have yet to meet the person who is asking for that feature or feel that the marketplace was calling for a way to turn whatever you wrote into a podcast read by two AI agents. So no, we're not meeting the needs. We're trying to figure out where it might fit in, but in the meantime, having a massive impact on the environment. And this is where I think the whole notion of forest for the trees, the title of this panel, becomes relevant. I wanted to ask you, how many of you have heard of Sam Altman? You know who he is. Okay. How many of you have heard the term taskers? Okay, so a lot fewer. So this is what I mean by not seeing the forest for the trees. In the same way that if I had asked you, have you heard of ChatGPT, you probably would have said yes. And if I had asked you, do you know how many data centers are in Santa Clara, which is the city that we live in, I, who again, care about this and read about this, I was surprised to find out that there are a whole bunch of data centers in Santa Clara, and many more being built. So we are not seeing the forest for the trees. Let me tell you a little bit about taskers. The work, so I will give you the title of an article that really says it all much better than I can. There was an article a few years ago called AI is a Lot of Work. It's outdated now in terms of the numbers, but the issue is even more relevant. And it talks about all of the people who label images or, try to decipher emotions or annotate or generate data that goes into these models. So there's a vast and growing number of people who are doing what's also called the reinforcement learning, who are writing code, are writing text, are evaluating and trying to say which, of 2 or 3 answers is better. And some of our students are going to graduate and go directly into the tasker class. including engineering students. It's really hard to get that first job sometimes. And there are now companies that will hire you as contractors and pay you, again, if you know how to write code, you might actually get paid fairly well to be writing snippets of code that get fed into generative AI models to make them better at coding. We're talking about vast numbers of people working on this, and they are not recognized, and they are often treated as, contractors, not paid very well. Many of them are in other countries. Many of them are hired not by the companies themselves that you hear about, Microsoft, Google, OpenAI, but third parties that these big companies contract with. And then they can go and hire people in other countries where many people need the work, where the pay is lower but might be okay for that country, but where, again, all the other conditions are not what we would like them to be if we're talking about human dignity, and if we're talking about fairness, and if we're talking about the Jesuit soul that we want to have reflected in the values behind these tools. It strikes me that even to have a conversation about whether AI cares, if you don't get sort of fooled by the forest for the trees and all the hype that we're living with, that should be a silly question, right? At this point, it's like asking whether a toaster cares. It's a really good, very convincing toaster, but it's not, it's just a tool, it's software. Of course it doesn't care. And part of the reason we're even having these conversations is because it's designed by human beings to sound like it might care and create those kind of chatbots, which are just one kind of use, but they're very pervasive now. And, teens especially are using them a lot. So yeah, we get fooled into thinking that there are these, industry leaders, and ignoring all of the people who are doing the menial work. We get fooled into thinking that there are all these, or being aware of all of these great benefits, but missing the harms, like the environmental harms. We're constantly being fed only partial information. And it's really hard to make an ethical decision when you don't have the facts. I put on the table a few copies of a framework that we have at the Ethics Center called the Framework for Ethical Decision Making, and it takes you through some steps that you might want to take if you're really struggling sometimes to figure out what the right thing to do is. It won't give you the answer. It'll just, help you through a process at the end of which you will be able to make a decision that is ideally better aligned with your own values. It's still your call. But one of the first steps is get the facts. And often as you go through the process, you realize that you still don't have, you have to go back to that. It's kind of a cyclical thing, and you have to get more facts. And another step is to ask, who are the stakeholders? And that really blows the question wide open, right? If you really think deeply about who are all the people and groups and organizations who are impacted by a decision, it really helps you see more. So I can tell you, I wanted to read you two things. One is a quote from an anthropologist. Well, okay, this is from the article that I just mentioned, about the tasks that people are now asked to do. Quote, the anthropologist David Graeber defines, apologize for the word, bullshit jobs as employment without meaning or purpose, work that should be automated, but for reasons of bureaucracy or status or inertia is not. These AI jobs are their bizarro twin, work that people want to automate and often think is already automated, yet still requires a human stand-in. The jobs have a purpose, it's just that workers often have no idea what it is. And there we go back to the whole discussion about purpose. Again, even the workers can't see the forest for the trees because they are just being told a narrow task that they have to do, and they don't understand how it fits in or even what company they work for. So I wanted to add that in because when I was trying to think about the stakeholders, when we talk about the environmental impact of all of this, and then we're really going to get into the conversation, this is who I listed as stakeholders for all of the things we talked about. Directly and indirectly impacted are the people whose data was used to train the models. We haven't talked about that. The people depicted in images and used to train models, the developers who created the models, the data labelers, the employees at the companies deploying AI products, the people whose jobs are being lost as tasks are relegated to AI, designers, call center operators, etc. Everyone involved in education, as we know. People who turn to chatbot for advice or companionship or legal guidance. Any organization, including nonprofits and governmental entities and universities, that deploy chatbots or other AI products. Any people who are subject to algorithmic decision-making. Regulators, lawyers, people who live in the vicinity of data centers because they are impacted differently than people who live farther away. People whose economic well-being relies on the development and deployment of AI and data centers. All of us who need access to electricity, all of us who need water and clean air to survive. So the reason it's so hard to see the forest for the trees is because there's a lot of forest and there are a lot of trees. So I'm going to stop there and we can take any questions you guys might have.
Well, thank you so much. Maybe if I walk like further away, it won't do it. I don't know. That was really fascinating, and I think what you said there at the end about the forest through the trees, and just how thick it really is sort of what I realized when I went to that meeting with you guys. I want to open it up. Anybody have any questions? Any of our panelists? If you guys all go at once. Oh, good. Oh, great. All right, great.
We'll clap. We promise we'll
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, all of the panelists. It was a really interesting range of considerations. The last, and I'm sorry, I forgot your name, Irina. Your comments, I found an interesting connection with what Karen was talking about. I was thinking, when you talked about the taskers, I wasn't familiar with the term, but I had read an article in the New York Times probably about 2 years ago about people who do those jobs, and most often offshore were the ones at the really basic level. And those jobs were horrifying. Like that article was very searing to read. The things, I thought of them as like sludge workers trying to clean the AI models from all of the toxic sludge of the internet. And so it described, not in a lot of detail, but I'm sure they tried to soften it up for New York Times readers, animal abuse, child abuse, racist diatribes, and the people were so damaged from doing those jobs, from trying to interact with the early versions, or I guess the rudimentary versions of the AI, and clean it up to then sound like someone who says, I'm sorry that you feel sad today. And they had to stop doing the jobs. It was like so inhuman to make it seem human. So anyway, I found a correlation between those two, and maybe you could comment on that connection.
Yeah, I think you're referring to what even before AI, let's say with social media, are the content moderators, without whom none of us would be able to use the internet. Period, because there are people who again work in other countries for many hours a day, looking through videos of murder and pornography and all of the stuff that we don't get to see, but that people upload to the internet all the time. So that preceded AI, and it continues to be the case with AI, people trying to clean up the data for the models. And this is where, instead of it's sort of necessary work, people are actually using AI to try to replace humans in that role in order to protect humans, but it's never perfect enough. And instead of sort of talking constantly about what a debt of gratitude we owe to people who are willing to or in a position to do that work, we completely cover up their existence, right? So again, everybody knows, who Mark Zuckerberg is. Nobody knows about content moderators and what they do. So that's part of the imbalance that we're talking about. Like, how do you make an ethical decision about what services you use when you don't know how they treat their content moderators, right? So much more transparency is needed.
If anything, they've recently gotten a really bad rap being lumped in with like a control of free speech, right? That's kind of the newest. I also thought it was a very kind of moving context. I had also a question for Karen in that sense, and that is you talked about that AI cannot generate feelings, and I mean it cannot have feelings itself, but I think they're far enough to generate feelings in us, you know, pulling that together, and there is so much. But what does it do to us, you know, in terms of a Jesuit connection, to be able to, or to, like, if it would show you, I don't know, animals being killed or something, it would maybe raise feelings of horror or you know, wanting to do something against it, right? And so then, and you know, how do we deal with the fact that they can manipulate us? That AI is far enough along to manipulate our emotions, and that has been shown to be the strongest predictor of people's actions as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think for me, and I'll just be really brief, but you know, when I think about what you know, what it is for an AI to, you know, ask you to feel this because this, you know, creature is being tortured or something like that. I mean, it's not that it's wrong for you to feel, it's very good for you to feel, but feeling itself depends upon a certain interrelationality between the thing and you know, the creature and you. And I think, you know, I study relationships, and I think that's part of what, why it is so disturbing, these examples that I gave, is that there is no interrelationality. It's all about you being manipulated, or you being provoked, or you being asked to deliver this without anything true coming back at you. And I think the Jesuit tradition really does value what is true, you know, and it's not. I mean, you know, I was asking my husband when I did this, well, isn't it good to hear, like, you're not alone? Like, that makes me feel great. Sorry, Dad, I'm not alone, you know, whatever. And it's like, okay, that takes us a little ways, but it really doesn't take us very far, because there's no interactivity at all. There's no true interactivity. There's only what we mirror back to ourselves.
Right.
Right?
It's like providing that like erosion of that personal connection, right? Like it's not actually, it's just agreeing with you.
Right.
Right? It's just, there's no like, you know, we have a complex relationship when we talk to humans, and like opinions change, people differ. And the chatbot itself is just going to like, you know, tell you you're having a great day, you're doing good. Yeah. And like you're missing out on an important, just like social piece.
And there is a question, but I'll say really quickly, care demands something of us, right? And chatbots are not designed to demand. They're designed to agree with us and to give us what we need. And if people interact with that kind of tool all the time, and then interact with a real human being who has his or her own needs and just has a bad day, or has, you know, is not in the mood to talk to you that day, then they think, oh, this is superior, right? But there is no caring there, right? So you get it, it's like having the equivalent of a, you know, psychological inflatable doll that you're dealing with, and that they're now very popular. Sorry, but you had a question.
I really appreciate all the insight. Thank you. I'm curious. I understand that it seems that AI can be this like fake thing that provides like a sense of human connection that's not really there. I think that's true. I wonder for folks who may be in a marginalized community, lesbian, gay, and growing up in a conservative space where they're not accepted by society. But AI kind of serves as an outlet where they can express who they are. How do you think that plays into this conversation?
That's such a great question. I mean, because I do think that it's really easy just to write it off and say, like, well, we're doing it better the old way. And in truth, the old way wasn't working for everybody, right? Yeah, I mean, particularly marginalized communities. You know, I think that in the short term, I do think there are positives here. You know, I mean, it made me feel better. Like, oh, I mean, I wasn't really lonely, but if I had been, like, I feel better. You know, this person understands me. But in the long term, I do take seriously what Irina just said, and I think there is a kind of a relational de-skilling that can go on when you're interacting with somebody that isn't demanding anything of you or that isn't truly offering back. And I mean, God, I just read in something over the weekend about a young woman who's 28, and her boyfriend is a chatbot, and she checks with him in the morning. She checks him in the evening. She's really happy with this chatbot, so she says. Now, I mean, I have to wonder, like, what is that going to mean for her long term? Because that is not going to be a person who is there for her. So, so I do think in the short, I'm not willing to say, wow, there's no good use for this at all. Or with the grief. I mean, for a period of time, one could see how that, it creeps me out, but how interacting with a recently deceased loved one could allow for something. But if somebody's going to do it for 5 years, we have to ask, where is that leading us? Where is that leading that person? So.
Can I take 20 seconds to answer also? That's a similar argument made with the internet, right? The internet, for all its faults, and we know that it can cause a lot of harm, but it absolutely allowed people who are feeling alone, in their environment to find like-minded people, including underrepresented, including not very nice people, right? It allows people to get together and find each other. So these are very much dual-use kind of situations, right? And it's the same thing. And what I would say with AI is if you have an AI tool that is being supportive and providing, let's say accurate information to a community, a child that's growing up who's feeling different, then this is maybe the first place that they'll actually be able to understand something about themselves. What I would worry about is, again, this is not some like natural thing that comes up. I would want to know who's providing that information, who's reading, or what is happening with all the stuff that the young person, the LGBT person, is putting into those prompts, right? That's part of the question here, because you can create a very dangerous thing that can look very attractive and helpful and then out people. So I think we just have to be so careful and recognize that there are absolutely benefits, and at the same time, there are great risks, and we have to be really cognizant. And I think the overarching problem is people talk about AI literacy. Most people don't even understand when we mean AI, what we're talking about. And when you talk about chatbots versus entirely different kind, like we should be having a lot of sort of different, narrower conversations than we're having right now. And I think there's a massive lack of AI literacy in general. And then we're having all these people play with them and potentially getting harmed.
And not only by the students, but also by the people that are supposed to be teaching the students. Where do they get that training from? Like a community training?
I mean, it's caught on so fast, right? So it's like what Edison invented the light bulb, and then 50 years later, only half of America had electricity. Right? It took 50 years to get half of the houses to get electricity. And you think about like how quickly this has come through, and I think that is why the messaging is a little lagging behind. Great people like you are doing this work where you're trying to like get the information out there and help cut down some of those trees, right? But I think like to me, it's the absolute speed that this is coming at everyone, right? And you guys are young people, like you know more about all this than I do. Like raise your hand if you use AI this week. Yeah, it's like,
If you did a Google search, you
did you say that's a lot of water?
No, no.
Oh.
I said we probably all did. Yeah, and I think like adding electricity to one's house is in some way transformational, but it's not as transformational as getting at every aspect of human interaction, information sharing, and like environmental use at the same time. I think it's the speed as well as the impact that's so so much needing our attention.
That's exact. Can I just say one
Yes,
final
please.
thing? That is exactly why it's so important to take a step back from it. I mean, because in many forms of technology, the technology has preceded kind of ethical thinking about it. I mean, this is kind of a truism in tech ethics, right? And so that's why one thing that Santa Clara I think potentially does well is to ask us to take that step back. What is the big picture? Who is being served by this really? And instead of just plunging in because it's super fun you know, to talk to Sesame or whatever the new one's name is.
Well, maybe that is the beauty of the AI with the Jesuit soul. Maybe we just unpacked it, Karen.
Right there.
I think that's a good place to finish.
All right.
So thank you
Thanks
so
for
much.
coming.
I really appreciate it. Thanks everybody.